Yo, all right. Um, Again, I'm Josh Holtz, and welcome to my first real recording on this YouTube channel. Today's recording is it's kind of talking about my Homebrew and Ruby and other developer tool installation on my M1. I've had my M1 MacBook Air now 10 months, I think. I think I got it in December of last year. And installing things on it when it first came out was a bit weird. Everything needed to be installed under an application called Rosetta, which Rosetta is kind of the M1 translator for applications that were written for Intel to actually run on the M1. So it kind of bridges that. But now, since we've had the M1 for a while, there are a lot of native M1 applications out there. A lot of the things compile for it, if that's the right terminology. But over the past few months, my original installations using Rosetta have kind of slowly broken. And last week I got a little unproductive because I couldn't really do much of my normal work because things just broke all of a sudden. So I kind of wanted to take some time to figure out why. And so I spent a lot of time uninstalling, reinstalling Homebrew, trying to figure out exactly how everything behaved, why everything behaved the way it did, and how I kind of wanted to install my Ruby's, Pythons, all the different languages that I need to kind of get into a nice development setup, so I didn't run into any weird issues during my day-to-day work. And with the new M1 MacBook Pros being released, there's probably going to be a few people that are also wondering the same thing. So today we're going to just talk and go over kind of how I have how I understand how M1 and Rosetta work, and how I have my terminal and Ruby versions and all that kind of stuff set up. So we're gonna get into it. Um, okay, so the first thing that we all do when we get a new MacBook is install Homebrew. Homebrew is our missing package manager for Mac. Actually, I don't think I uninstalled Homebrew. I didn't uninstall Homebrew. Okay, hold on. We're gonna uninstall Homebrew quick. My bad. Okay, you know. Okay, cool. We're uninstalling it. Pretend you didn't see this. Nice. Okay, so we don't have Homebrew. Not at all. We're gonna do which brew. There's no brew there. We completely removed everything. So first things first, now that we have this, we're gonna install Homebrew. We go to brew.sh, click the little script. We're gonna make this bigger. We all want our Homebrew, right? It's how we install. I mean, Fastlane, Cocoa Pods, wget, I guess is what I install. I don't even know what else I install. But we're gonna install our version manager for things. But we're gonna install Homebrew first. So one thing that you'll notice after I secretly enter my password is Homebrew now installs in opt/homebrew. Previously, in on Intel Macs, it installed in users/local. But when installing Homebrew on the M1, that's the new directory. So this turns out to be weird if you did hard code a lot of your Homebrew paths and stuff to user local, but we'll get around that. So right now we're just installing Homebrew. It has to pull all of its stuff down. It's gonna take some time. So we're gonna go talk about something else while it does this thing. If you read about how to handle M1 and Rosetta when doing terminal related stuff, you'll see that a lot of blogs say, hey, let's copy terminal and make a new one called Rosetta terminal. Okay. And if we go into the get info of our new Rosetta terminal application, I just copied the terminal one. We'll see that there's a checkbox for open using Rosetta. I think this was automatically checked because I renamed it Rosetta. But if we go to the terminal one, go to get info on our standard terminal one, it's not checked. So what does this mean? This means anything that we run in Rosetta terminal, okay, it tried to reuse my session from the existing one down here. Anything that I run in this Rosetta terminal gets run as an i386 processor. So in the i386 architecture thing, which then gets translated through Rosetta to run for M1 ARM. But the thing that we notice here is that I have two terminal windows open, and it's already very confusing for me. Like what is the Rosetta one? What is the standard one? We can go here and say hover over terminal in my sidebar, terminal, hover over Rosetta terminal. Let's turn this on. Do not disturb. Okay, cool. So the Rosetta terminal then brings open this one. Cool. So we have that. But like, how do we actually know? Well, there's this cool command called arc, which will actually tell you. So we type arc, we're in i386. If we open a new tab in our other one and type arc, we're in ARM64. Cool. So that's a good way to know, like, hey, I'm doing stuff in ARM. Oh, I'm gonna go do stuff in i386. And you're like, why do I want to be in one or the other? You know, you probably won't need to be in one or the other right now. My camera's messed up. There it goes. Okay. Majority of the stuff right now is that at least I use in my day-to-day is pretty much written or compiles for M1 ARM64. But if you need to run Python 2.7.18, that actually doesn't compile in ARM64. It only compiles in i386. So that's when you would run that in this Rosetta terminal. So we'll go through that later. But right now we also want to let's install Homebrew in our Rosetta version. So we're going to run the exact same script. We're going to enter my exact same password, and you'll see, hey, we're going to install stuff in user local bin brew. Cool. So now you're asking me, why do we have two Homebrew installs? Well, you probably won't actually need to use the Rosetta one very much, unless you're installing something like, cool, that was quick. Unless you're installing something like the super old Python through Homebrew. I think this Homebrew had some stuff cached from one of my previous installs, so that's fine. But most of the things that we are going to actually run will be installed through the ARM version of Brew. Anything that we install through the ARM version of Brew will actually still be available to us in our i386 Rosetta terminal, because both at the end do run in ARM64. i386 will just try to compile things in i386 first, or if you're running something like a Ruby interpreter or something like that, it'll run that stuff in i386. But i386 will try to run any i386 binaries first, or try to compile for i386 first. But it will run anything that is also ARM. But we do want to install both brews in case there is a separate brew thing that we do want to install through i386. So there's that. But one thing that you are usually used to after you install Homebrew, which we'll see after I'm going to close this Rosetta one for now. I'm just going to fully close Rosetta one for now. After our Homebrew install finishes, is you usually end up putting the Homebrew install location in your path. That way when you type brew, it knows what you're actually trying to do. So once this is done, it'll tell us to put something in our Z profile. So going back into that is I use ZSH. A lot of people still also use bash. ZSH has something called a ZSHRC. Bash has a bash RC. And these files are ones that load when your terminal first loads up, where you can set paths, aliases, environment variables, set all those kinds of things. So now that Homebrew is done installing, we can see that it gives us some instructions to add Homebrew to our path. It does an echo eval for opt homebrew shell env, and that will add it to our Z profile. And then below that there is an eval. So we'll run the echo to the Z profile, adds the shell env, and then we eval, which kind of reloads it. We type which brew, and opt homebrew is the path that it's installed at, which is exactly what we want. So we're going to go look into our Z profile and see what it shows. Vim.z profile. Boom. Okay, so it has this eval opt homebrew bin shell env. I'm going to put this into the ZSHRC because we're going to do a little bit more work in there that does some other fun stuff. But this is just what the Homebrew install tells us to do. So we're just gonna delete this and come back. So we're gonna go into our Vim or into our ZSHRC. Right now, I don't have anything in here. But what we're going to do is can I put this here? Okay, so we'll put this in here for now. We'll source our ZSHRC and we'll show that brew still works. So which brew dash dash prefix. So as I mentioned, I don't like having a terminal and a Rosetta terminal. So what I want to do is I found that there was a way where I can switch between ARM64 and i386 all within one terminal window. So there's this really cool command. Where is it here? Arc. There we go. Okay, so we'll just do arc. I think I have it here. Arc -x 8664 ZSH. This will actually run my ZSH session in Rosetta. So if I type arc i386, if I can do the same thing though, but going back the opposite direction, arc-arm64 ZSH, and it runs an ARM64. So we can actually switch between them really nicely, but I'm like, okay, but which one am I actually in? I don't actually know. Unless I type arc, I don't want to have to type arc all the time. So the nice thing with ZSH is you can override the prompt, which is like the part on the left, to actually show what architecture you're in. So I actually modified a theme here that I'll share in the description below to a gist. But if I source this now, I can see I'm in ARM64. If I go back to x86, it's there. So it's just a nice little way for me to know, hey, I'm in ARM64. Just a way to validate I'm in the right one. Again, most of the time, I'm going to want to be in ARM64. But it is good to know. But you're like, I don't want to type this all the time. I don't want to type it all the time. Well, we can add aliases for it. So what we're going to do is, here we go. We added mzsh, which takes us to ARM64, and izsh, which takes us to Rosetta. So let's go izsh. Oh, I forgot to source my, here we go, izsh. We're in i386, and mzsh, we're back in ARM64. Cool. But one thing that we run into now is we install brew, one on ARM64, one in i386. And I don't think the path thing is going to be right there. The reason being is we are evaling opt homebrew bin brew no matter if we're in ARM64 or i386. So if we go back to i386 and we do brew dash dash prefix, we're using opt homebrew. We don't want that. We want to be using our Rosetta homebrew. So with that, we're gonna put some more magic in here. Let's go back to MZSH. Okay, go back to our ZSHRC, and we're gonna add this thing. So if we're running an i386, we are going to just echo. We're running in i386 for fun. We're gonna eval user local homebrew, and then alias brew to be user local homebrew bin brew. Otherwise, if we're in ARM mode, we're going to do the exact same thing, but instead of user local, we're going to use opt homebrew and an alias brew and opt homebrew bin brew. Then we can get rid of the eval that homebrew told us to do. And yeah, so now we'll be good. So we're just going to source this. We're going to do brew dash dash prefix in our ARM64, and we're in opt homebrew. If we izsh, it tells us we're running in i386 mode, and brew dash dash prefix, we're using user local homebrew. Fantastic. Okay. And to kind of prove this just one more time, I'm going to get, oh, no. I kind of messed up my reset. There it is. Okay. We're going to change back to MZSH. If we open up our Rosetta terminal, it's going to say, there it is, i386. So it's just a quick way of just doing that arc-x8664 command. But we're not going to use that. I don't like using that. We're gonna stay here. So that kind of ends our little session on installing Homebrew in both M1 and Rosetta. We can install something through brew in M1 by doing brew install wget or whatever it is. If we want to install something that is i386 specific for some reason, you can do the same thing, brew install wget. Again, most tools through Homebrew now do work on the M1 natively, but there might be some that you run across that you might have to jump into this izsh and install through there. But we're gonna get out of there. We're gonna go back to MZSH. We're just gonna, so now we're gonna talk about version managing for Ruby, Python, and other things. So the tool that we're going to use now for this is Asdf. Manage multiple runtime versions within a single CLI tool. Perfect. We're gonna do it for Ruby. They can do it for Python, Elixir. I don't actually know what they all have. We can look into it. I don't always use ASDF. I personally prefer Ruby install and chruby. It's two separate tools, very Ruby specific, because I am in Ruby a lot. But ASDF is nice. So we're gonna use ASDF for this example. We might do a Ruby install and chruby at the end, but let's go with this one. So we're gonna brew install ASDF. This might take some time. Actually, I don't think it's too bad. But so ASDF is just a command line tool that, like I said, manages versions for multiple different kinds of tools, or for different runtimes: Ruby, Python, Elixir. And then one of the nice things with ASDF is ASDF does install shims, which is a nice way for you to like change your global Ruby version, where it kind of like takes control of the Ruby it aliases essentially the Ruby executable that would be the system Ruby. Things go to the ASDF version first, and it handles all of the redirecting of which version it should actually use. Shims can be a little bit scary because it is taking control of things, but it does make things a little bit nicer. I probably explained shims totally wrong. Please read up on it. But Ruby install and chruby don't use shims, which feels a little bit less scary to me, but we're just going to use Asdf. So what Asdf says is to add something to our ZSHRC. So we're going to do that. You'll notice here that it does have the opt homebrew path in it. This is fine, as I mentioned earlier. When you're in your Rosetta terminal, it can still use stuff written for, or it will still use stuff written and compiled for ARM64. It'll actually run better, and we're not going to install this on both sides. This is fine to have hard coded to the M1 homebrew side. So we're going to source it like it. So well, it says restart your terminal. Source kind of restarts it. So if we do which Asdf now, we have Asdf. The first thing we have to do is install a plugin, which is our Ruby plugin. My camera's messed up. Ruby plugin, Python plugin. So we're going to install Ruby. So Asdf plugin install plugin add. There it is. Asdf plugin add Ruby. So it doesn't look like it's going to do much, but it does do something. We can now do Asdf list all Ruby. This is going to list all the different Ruby versions we can possibly install. There it is. There's a lot of them. Truffle Ruby, RBX, JRuby, which is I think Ruby that runs on the JVM. Ruby 3, Ruby 2, 7, 2.6, all of the old Rubies. Cool. So we're going to run Asdf install Ruby latest, which will install Ruby 3.0.2. In this process, it installs or downloads and installs OpenSSL. Now it's going to download the Ruby tar and actually install the Ruby thing. This is going to take some time most likely, so I'll probably fast forward through here once I'm done talking. But this will install Ruby for ARM64 because Ruby can handle that. For some reason, if this Ruby version couldn't, we'd have to switch over into i386/Rosetta. But for Ruby, we're fine. So honestly, there's not much scary stuff about having an M1 and having Homebrew or Ruby or anything like that, mostly right now, because a lot of the tools are adapted for M1. Back when I got my M1 Air in last December, as I mentioned earlier, things were a little bit scary. We get most of the time when we had to run thing in Rosetta, because that's all that was really available. But we're gonna, once we're done installing Ruby, we're gonna install Python in a way through Rosetta because there's a version of Python that doesn't work on M1. So that's gonna be our example. But right now we're just installing Ruby, and then we'll test it out, I guess. Asdf has a few different ways to select the version of Ruby you are using. We'll go to the website while it's doing its install. We're going to go to set a version. So the way that this works is you can set a global version. You would do Asdf global Ruby and then latest or 3.0.2. And whenever you're in a directory or whenever you're in a terminal, that's the Ruby it'll use. It's kind of nice, kind of magic. Cool, it's done. So we'll actually go do that. But you can also install local versions, which will install a hidden file in your directory. So that when you go into a directory, if you don't want to use the latest, you want it to use Ruby 2.7, it can do that. So you'd use that if you're doing like project-specific things. My camera's doing weird stuff. Okay, so we're gonna do Asdf global Ruby 3.0.2. Nice. So we're just gonna do source. Just get a nice refresh here. And if we do ruby-h version, We have Ruby 3.0.2. Nice. Okay, so let's prove that this works. We're gonna go into my Fastlane directory, and we're gonna just run a bundle install and see if it installs everything. So it's installing all the things. You can see it's installing some native extension-y things. Some things take some time. And it looks like everything, this bundle install worked. So if we run bundle exec fastlane -version, nice, cool. So we are running Fastlane 2.197 in Ruby 3.0.2 on the M1. So we have Ruby installed. That's cool. That's cool. So if we want to install another version of Ruby, what we would do is just do Asdf install Ruby 2.7.3 or something, and then you can change them if you want. But yeah, that's an awesome way to get Ruby. But now let's go back to the hey, I'm having issues with ARM64 i386 thing, and we're going to try that with Python. So we're going to do Asdf plugin add Python, Asdf list all Pythons. It's going to get all the Pythons. There's a lot of them. The version that we're going to grab, so the latest ones, Python 3.9, work fine on the M1. But let's say you want to install Python 2.7. So let's do Asdf install Python 2.7.18. It's going to do its thing, try and download it, and it's going to yell at us being like, hey, I can't compile for this architecture. Hopefully it does it sooner rather than later. So this is where I wouldn't really have known what to do when I first got my M1 last December. I didn't really fully understand how this worked until last week when I just uninstalled, reinstalled everything over and over again. Which felt a little unproductive, but I really wanted to know how things worked. So here, you get an error of, is there a good, where is it? Let's see, build failed. I think there's something about architecture here. There was, at least the last time I did it. Build failed using Python something, install, there are results, let's see, crypto. Oh, here, symbols not found for architecture i386. Well, because we're not on the i386. So if we switch over to our IZSHRC, IZSH, and we run our install again, this will work. So what this is doing then is it's installing this, or compiling it as i386, and then it kind of puts a nice little ARM M1 wrapper around it so that we can actually we can call Python still, this Python 2.7.18, even from within our ARM64 terminal session. Under the hood, it still runs that in Rosetta because it's that's what it's compiled for. Or does it bridge? I don't exactly know. Either way, we compiled it for i386 and it still runs on the M1. And we can run it in the i386 terminal session, or we can run it in the ARM64 one. We just got to now wait for this to happen. So I'm going to fast forward this video and we'll talk more when it's done. Okay, so we got Python installed now. If we do Asdf list Python, it'll show us our version. Dope. We're gonna set that as our global version, Asdf global Python 2.7.18. Now if we run Python -- version, it shows us that. If we just run Python, we can print some stuff here. I think, is that the, yes, print. Okay, cool. So We're in i386. We ran our Python 2.7.18. Awesome. But what we can do now, this is the fun stuff. We're gonna go back to our mzsh. Watch this. Python -- version 2.78, 2.7.18. Sorry. Run Python. So that's the coolest thing that I discovered last week. Is I have one terminal. I by default try and do everything I can in ARM64. Installing Python 2.7 didn't work. No. So I then switched over to Rosetta, compiled and installed Python through Rosetta, switched back over to ARM64, and I have Python 2.7.18 running. And the way, again, that works is by switching over to i386, I compiled and installed Python in like the i386 emulator thing, and then Apple Mac OS did its M1 magic wrapper around it, and now I can use it everywhere. So I don't have to always be in my Rosetta terminal. I can just jump into Rosetta stuff when I want to compile, jump back out, jump in, jump out. So that's my magic around that. And I think that's pretty much what we're gonna think. I think that's it for this video. I might do a separate video on a Ruby installation instead of Asdf after this. Just a nice little short one because again, I prefer Ruby install in Ruby. But we'll make that a separate video. But yeah, this is it. I will in the description put a link to my gist that has my ZSHRC along with my theme that shows the current architecture. I'll probably have a blog post along with this just so that it's kind of easier to follow along, copy commands. Thanks for watching this far. Hit the subscribe button thingy, hit the like button, don't hit the dislike. I lied. You can hit that if you want. But don't. Please tell me in the comments how you feel about this and kind of what else you would like to see. Thank you.